All right, so we got a lot to cover today. We are beginning our annual Back to Basics series we do each January, and our theme this year is Basics Power for a Great Life. Now, I always love it when I find wisdom, deep wisdom in the most unusual places. And I ran across a Peanuts cartoon that really says a lot to me anyway. And Linus and Charlie Brown are walking together. It's 4 frames, and as they're walking, Linus is talking to Charlie Brown. And Linus says, "I feel sorry for little babies. When a little baby is born into this cold world, he's confused, he's frightened. He needs something to cheer him up." And in the last frame, they stop, and Linus says to Charlie Brown, "The way I see it, as soon as a baby is born, he should be issued a banjo." Now, as a banjo player, I was delighted to run across that. However, as a minister, what I know is what we all would do well to be issued and to receive are the basic principles for effective living. And that's what we're going to lift up in these 4 sessions, these 4 weeks called Back to Basics. Now, I want to be clear that when I talk about basics, we're not talking about something that is merely elementary or simplistic. Please don't abide in that illusion, because what we'll be covering is actually foundational and essential. I love it when I receive letters from you all talking about how the teaching works in your life and our community. And one gentleman sent me a letter at the end of October that I found very, very powerful. He said, "I've been active at Mile High since I returned to Colorado to retire 2 years ago. But I was raised in spiritual consciousness, and I've pursued it off and on for much of my life. So as I explored the programs at Mile High, I fell into a certain pattern of thinking. But this is just basic entry-level stuff for beginners. Where is the more advanced content? I realize now that this pattern was my ego's resistance to growth by protesting a return to spiritual basics school." And he goes on in this long letter and describing the rich path of his past and also some of his more recent studies. And he concludes with a powerful realization. "At long last, Dr. Roger, I've learned that spiritual growth is not about some exotic curriculum of ever more advanced content and levels of mysticism. It's about the same foundational truths. It's about learning the same foundational truths over and over again until our every thought, word, and action is in perfect harmony with heaven." Now that is so powerful. Yeah, it's about learning the same foundational truths over and over again until our every thought, word, and action is in harmony with the reality of God, with the reality of heaven. So I invite you in these 4 Sundays to really open in a brand new way. And especially if you're new with us this day, open your hearts to this, set aside what you've been told before, and just see what moves within you. Allow a deepening wherever you are on your journey, the greater realization and activation of these universal life principles. So now before we dive into our first part of this, I want to give some background to you, especially if you're new with us. And again, it just thrills me that you're starting on this journey if you are new with us. And it'll be a reminder, some of you who I call veterans. All right, so some of the background basics here. Our founder, his name is Dr. Ernest Holmes, and he was born in New England, and he was born and raised, educated there. And then he gravitated to the West Coast, where he did his teaching and healing work. Now, he was greatly impacted as he grew up by the writings of Emerson and the American Transcendentalists, also by a British judge named Thomas Troward, and then by reading some of the earlier translations of the Hindu texts of the Upanishads. And he put all of that together in what he eventually would do. He was a wildly popular and powerful speaker, filling some of the biggest auditoriums wherever he went, first on the West Coast and then throughout our country. And he also then became a prolific writer as well. Now, our teaching then actually is a blend of Eastern and Christian mysticism. And we also bring into it the deep mystical teachings of all the faith paths, which is why on most Sundays you will hear us bless all faith paths, the deep truths in those paths, because that's what sources what we're all about. We often call it the golden thread of truth that weaves throughout all of the various paths. And you can see that pictured in our tapestries that hang here in the sanctuary. That's what the teaching is about. And this teaching is also meant to be a very practical spirituality. Something that we use in every area of our lives, not just reserved for Sundays, but for every day and every moment of our lives. Dr. Holmes wrote, "The science of mind and spirit is a direct approach to God and conscious use of God power in every activity of living." You see, we use this all the time and in every way. Now, our movement, we're part of a worldwide movement. It used to be called religious science, but that became increasingly confusing to folks. And I need to share with you some of the things that we are not. We are not Christian Science. We are not Scientology. We've never been any of that. And I think another thing is that as you understand this, you realize that we're not a traditional spiritual approach. We're non-traditional, and yet we bring forth new rays of light that I think are very important and valuable in the spiritual landscape. Now, in this regard, please understand that our teaching is called the science of mind and spirit. That's our teaching. Now, we are a part of a movement now called Centers for Spiritual Living. We're also a part of a larger umbrella movement called New Thought, simply New Thought, or New Thought, Ageless Wisdom. Now, our movement is not a heavy-handed, controlling, domineering kind of religion. We're not into that, Too much religion in the past has been toxic, cultivating lots of fear and division. And I think that more and more individuals are waking up to that and sadly enough, opting out of those kinds of thought systems. I actually believe that there are twin sins of religion, if you look at history. The twin sins of religion are absolutism and authoritarianism. Absolutism, the declaration that there's only one teaching or one valid truth, and all others are invalid or inconsequential. Now, that kind of absolutism then usually spawns authoritarianism, and that becomes a heavy-handed, controlling church telling people what to do, what to think, how to live, making their choices for them, and otherwise intentionally manipulating them. And in that regard, then, this kind of authoritarianism has over history been the starting point for so much aggression and division and discrimination, violence, and even racism. And so we're really not involved in that whatsoever. We want to be a new answer to those kinds of tendencies. Now, in that regard, science of mind, in this teaching, we don't tell people what to think. How in the world would we ever want to tell a bunch of rebellious people like you what in the world to think? I love that about you, by the way. You're free thinkers. You're self-reliant. We don't tell people what to think. We aspire to help people learn how to think. And to think beyond the old ideas, the old concepts, the old limits in their life. Now, we have no political affiliations or leanings. We don't tell you how to vote. We don't endorse or denounce any candidates or public officials. We don't do that. We leave that to your own guidance in your life. Now, what we do is that occasionally we do speak out about instances of social injustice, wherever we notice those, wherever we notice things going on that are incongruent with our ultimate vision, and that is oneness revealed. We want to be a part of the evolution of spirituality. Our founder wrote, "The religion of the future will appear when religion gets over its superstition, science gets over its materialism, and philosophy gets over its duality. We are forerunners in a campaign of spiritual freedom intellectual integrity, and emotional stability in a spiritual world. It is our privilege to take part in a new spiritual renaissance. That's what we're about. And I'll tell you more about some of the things that we are and are not in our coming installments. But now let's move into the very first topic for this series, and that is the perfect spirit in you. The perfect spirit in you. In 1927, our founder, Dr. Holmes, was asked to write a clear, concise, and definitive statement of what we're about, what we believe. And he sat down, and it said that he wrote it in 20 minutes. And what he wrote has become a classic document in our teaching. And it is called What We Believe. Jennifer sang a song about it, and I am going to be excerpting from this larger statement, What We Believe, a couple of the paragraphs in it per our topic. And what I'm going to be covering today is on the inside left-hand column of your bulletin. But Dr. Holmes didn't write this to be a rigid, closed creed, but instead to just express the basic principles that we are about and that we build on. Because he said, as a spiritual movement, let us remain open at the top. I love that. Remain open at the top for further revelation and new understanding. And that's what we aspire to do. So the first excerpt from that great document, What We Believe, is this. We believe in God, the living Spirit Almighty, one indestructible, absolute, and self-existent cause. This one manifests itself in and through all creation, but is not absorbed by its creation. The manifest universe is the body of God. It is the logical and necessary outcome of the infinite self-knowingness of God. So in that statement, we're introduced to the most essential, fundamental principle in this great teaching, and that is the allness and the oneness of God, of the Creator, of the Spirit, of the source. Now, we use many names for the divine, and if the word God is troubling to you because of your background, then there are many others to choose from. Find the one that resonates with your heart, the beloved, the Spirit, the divine, infinite mind, infinite love, whatever works for you. The infinite is beyond any words we would ever have for it anyway. And yet what we are coming to understand in a statement such as this is what the enlightened masters have tried to say throughout the ages, and that is, God is really all there is. God is all there is. And all creation is brought forth out of the divine, and all creation lives within the divine, even though we don't see that with our senses. Everything is living within the infinite intelligence, love, and power of the divine. So this is beginning to understand the divine or the Creator as something fully present, everywhere, at all times. Not a distant God, off in a cloud somewhere, but a divine reality, an infinite truth, life energy, love, a power, the very power of life itself, in our midst and expressing as all there is. Now this principle of oneness and allness flows throughout the great faith traditions if you dig deeply into them. A sampling of some of them. From the Hindu tradition of the Bhagavad Gita, it's written, I am the soul that exists in everything. I am the beginning, the middle, and the end of all lives. I am mind, dwelling in all living creatures. I am light, consciousness, the eternal word. I am the one who never changes. And also from Hinduism, from the Upanishads, all that is manifest is filled with God. From God all things flow. And then from the traditions of Taoism and Lao Tzu, the great Tao pervades all things. It caused all things to come into existence. And from the Buddha, universal mind exists like a vast and boundless ocean. And then from the teachings of Christianity and Jesus, I am the first and I am the last, and beside me there is no other. For in God we live and move and have our being, it is written. So we being many are one body in Christ, and everyone members of one another. And my favorite, God is love, and they that dwell in love dwell in God, and God in them. So we're getting this sense that there's an invisible reality out of which all visible life emerges. The good news is we have access to that deep invisible reality. We are becoming aware of an eternal and an infinite presence that can never be an absence. And I tell you what, this has incredibly powerful ramifications for you and me at a personal level. And that leads us to the second excerpt from What We Believe. It's coming up on the screen. We believe in the individualization of the Spirit in us, and that all people are individualizations of the one Spirit. So this is suggesting then that we, every one of us, is an expression of that one life, that ultimate life. You are an expression of the life and the love and the power of the divine. You're not just created by the divine and cast off separate from it. You live within it and you are created of it. And so therefore we become aware, and it's so powerful to know this first day, that you and I are not primarily physical beings, even though we most often primarily identify ourselves as our bodies. Instead, we are actually spiritual beings, primarily, having a human, a worldly, and a material experience, and yet we are ultimately and always spiritual beings. Or as the great teacher Jesus said, you are in the world, but not of it. For you're a child of the universe, of the Spirit. Now Dr. Holmes, he says, God has made you out of himself. The only material he had was the spiritual substance of his own being. The only mind he had to implant in you was his mind. The only spirit he had to implant in you was his own spirit. We must unify our mentalities with pure spirit. We must recognize the absolute unity of God and man, the oneness. Man is in God and God is in man. This is the recognition Jesus had when he said, I and the Father are one. And that's also what Jesus meant when he said, the kingdom of God doesn't come by observation. It's not over here or over there. For behold, the kingdom of God is within you. Within you. Take this in. Sense that larger life of you. In fact, I love the way Rabbi Lawrence Kushner puts it. And maybe you'll just do this, just take a moment. He says, first of all, hold up your hands before your eyes. So if you'll just hold up your hands before your eyes. Lovely, aren't they? And he says, you are looking at the hands of God. And you can take them down. The very hands of God. So in this beautiful realization, we're deepening a sense of the perfect Spirit in every one of us, the perfect Spirit, and how it is that each and every one of us is a unique, specialized expression, or what that phrase called an individualization of the one. You're a unique way the one life is celebrating and expressing itself. Are you showing God a good time? You are a unique, precious, prized expression of this divine life. So this concept of oneness doesn't mean sameness, diversity within the one. Unity doesn't mean uniformity. All of us uniquely expressing this one life, and all of us sharing that deep oneness. Now, it's in this uniqueness that some of our challenges arise, because we tend to start judging. We start judging the unique way we personally live. We start judging other people's uniqueness and the way they live. And it's all the judging that we do, despite being told judge not. It's all the judging we do that gets us into such a great challenge in this life. Think of it like this. Think of it as lampshades. Yeah, lampshades. You know, you chose to come here. And whether you realize it or not, you chose a lampshade. And that lampshade is your uniqueness, the uniqueness you wear. It's your unique heritage, your unique culture, your skin color, the varieties we have of that. Yours is a certain one. You chose to be gay or straight. You chose to be able-bodied or differently abled as you came forth in life. You chose your idiosyncrasies and your personal traits. You chose your culture, all parts of the lampshade, and as you express that and that lampshade, then you also added to it your experiences and your memories and your history. All of this is a lampshade. And there are times when we look around and we see all these lampshades, all these unique expressions, we see our own, and we think that rules the day. But understand this, you are never under the law of the lampshade. You're never under its law. Because within it is the light. And that's who you are. Yeah, you've got your unique lampshade, and it's wonderful to embrace that and shine through that. And yet, it's also powerful to remember we are the light. You are the light. That's more fundamental than any of the uniquenesses that you express in your life. That's a powerful thing to understand, because then we can come out of the trance of separation, the trances of fear, the trances of alienation and misperception in this life. And in many respects, what we're doing is we're unlearning our way back to God. And that's a beautiful thing. And that brings us to the third statement from what we believe, a simple but beautiful one. We believe that heaven is within us, as the great teacher said, and that we experience it to the degree that we become conscious of it. And so to indeed become conscious of this heaven within, this perfect spirit within, is one of the highest missions of our teaching. And we can all be about that. You wouldn't be here if you were not on that pathway. That's why our classes are so important. This movement didn't start out as a church. It was first an educational institution teaching these classes, because there are things that we can learn, a lot we can unlearn, and then tools we can put to use. That's what's transformed thousands and thousands of lives and what's available. And I don't want to leave you with no way to put this to work, this first step this week. So in addition to the courses, I want to get us started with three things that can help us really experience this perfect spirit within. And the first one is be still. Be still. A great early metaphysician, Joel Goldsmith, he said, most people have never learned how to sit down by themselves and be quiet. Now, I find that increasingly so in our busy, busy world, and the din of voices around us, influences around us, all the social media going on, and we're barraged by so much content. How important it is, especially as we open up a new yearly cycle. If we want to know who we really are at depth, you gotta have times of being still. God is experienced in the stillness and in the heart. Be still. That's why we have the meditation retreat. Try on different forms of meditation. And in that stillness, something blossoms in such a beautiful, healing, empowering way. Yeah, it's when we become still that we start really experiencing the light within the lampshade. Now, we set aside all of the stuff and the mind chatter and all the barrage of things coming at us. And we simply move to that depth within. That's what the stillness does for us. Moves us to the depth and moves us to what I call the knower in us. Not the thinker that's just rehashing all the data we've put in our heads, but the knower born of a higher truth within us. To be still. There's a great practice of this that you can take into your spiritual practices, and I'll put this up on the screen as well. It comes from the 46th Psalm, and it's based on the statement in that psalm, be still and know that I am God. I would invite you to just, in your quiet time, just to declare that. Be still and know that I am God. The oneness. The I am that is God. The oneness. And then you go to the next step that shortens it a little. Be still and know that I am. Because God is, you are. Be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am. And then simply go to the next step of be still and know. Know beyond words and thoughts and concepts. Just know. Just be still. Ultimately, it leads us to just be. In the purest of ways, to just be. Wonderful spiritual practice. We can get us started. Be still. Secondly, love forward. No, I didn't say step forward, as you might think on a first of the year kind of message. I didn't say leap forward or move forward. I said love forward. Because what I have come to learn in my own life is that all genuine progress in our lives must always be infused with the energetic of love. The times I've tried to make progress in my life when I was bitter with myself or demanding of myself or unloving with myself never went anywhere. It's when I was willing to envelop myself in love, when I was willing to tap into the love that is the perfect spirit within me, that things began to evolve. You see, this love I speak of is a force field, a universal force field that dissolves separation. It dissolves fear. It dissolves misunderstandings and enmity wherever it exists. And it moves us forward in our lives in such a way then that as we are loving ourselves, imagine a new year for you that is really dedicated to cherishing you, not in an egotistical way, but respecting the truth of you, loving yourself, empowering yourself, thinking of yourself in greater terms than the lampshade and all the judgments you may hold about that. As a child of God nurturing you, as you would nurture an infant handed over to you, to nurture you in that same way. As a minister, and I know my colleagues would agree here, we are so privileged to see the journeys of people's healing and unfoldment before us in our classes and in other experiences. And I remember seeing a young lady, a 20-something young lady, and I started seeing her about 2 years ago. She would arrive and be in a wheelchair, and a friend would be pushing her. She would arrive to our healing light services. We're actually synchronistically doing one tonight at 5:30, our monthly healing light service, an hour of deep meditation in the healing energy. And she would arrive for these back 2 years ago, and I could tell she was very weak. She was ashen in color. She seemed incredibly burdened and also fragile and frail. But she'd come to these services, very dedicated, each and every month. And over about a year's time, I began to see some improvement for her. And then about 3 classes ago, 3 of my Beyond Limits class, which again is our starting point, I was surprised and delighted to see that she had registered and enrolled in Beyond Limits as well, to really learn these principles at depth. And she sat always in the front row. She was always there early, and I could just see her drinking this in. And over the 8 sessions of this profound class, I saw her begin to open up. I saw color coming back to her. She began to walk in, haltingly at first, out of the wheelchair. But she began walking, and she became more fluid with her walking. I could see that she was more involved in life rather than pulled back from life. What I was seeing was such a beautiful thing. The last night of class, I arrived early to set up, and she had arrived early and was sitting in her accustomed seat. So after I was set up, I sat down by her and said, I hope this class has been a blessing to you. And the tears started flowing. She said, you don't know what's happened for me. She went and she told me about, as a little girl, her family got involved in a very toxic cult. And they did some very terrible things, and she was significantly abused. And it scarred her at depth. And she said, yeah, I came up with this disease, but I have come to realize that it merely took over into a body, into a spirit that felt absolutely worthless. And as I've experienced the healing energies here in these teachings, I've found love again. I have actually felt the love of the divine telling me that I'm more than what happened. And I have practiced loving myself. And in the work we did in the class to forgive, I forgave my parents and all they were associated with. And I gave myself back to this life. That made my decade. And she's doing so beautifully. Love forward. Love forward. The last thing. In this year of 2017, not only be still, love forward, but lighten up. Lighten up a little bit. Because we've got this glorious miracle called life. And we slink around, is that a word? We trudge around as though we're carrying the weight of the world, and life brought you here to celebrate. You know, God was not having a bad day when you were envisioned and called into creation. The divine said, I want to bring forth this beautiful spirit and put potentialities into the seed of my spirit in them. And I want to turn them loose to bring glory to life. Let there be you. And there was. And it's good. And it's very, very good. Let's go for it with joy. As somebody wisely wrote, this life is joy. Recover it, because in your joy is your strength. In your joy is your greater vision. In your joy, the perfect spirit within you flourishes. And it's all even better than getting a banjo, which is not half bad either. Receive these principles. Let your light shine.